Somewhere in Sweden, about 15 years ago, an engineer looked at an outboard motor and asked a question nobody else was asking. Why does the engine have to stand up? Every outboard ever built stands its engine vertically, drives a shaft straight down through a set of gears in the lower unit, and lives with the compromises that lay out forces. The company that came out of that question builds an outboard where the engine lies flat on its side. A 3-liter twin-turbo straight 6 borrowed from BMW's most expensive sedans, where the lower unit contains no gears whatsoever, and where the propeller is driven by a carbon fiber belt. It sounds like a machine that shouldn't work. Around 5,000 of them are working right now, mostly on boats that earn money, and one operator puts his fuel savings at $500,000 in 4 years. This is the story of the most contrarian engine on the water. What happens when you rebuild the outboard from a question instead of a tradition? What the numbers really say once you notice the company's own documents don't quite agree with each other, and whether any of it matters to the way you boat. Let's get into it. Quick thing before we start. If you own a boat, you already know the worst part isn't buying it. It's that phone call from the shop. They tell you a number and you have no idea if it's fair. You just pay. I got tired of watching guys get taken like that, so I put together the Outboard Repair Defense Guide. It's simple. Every common outboard repair, what it should actually cost, how to tell when a problem is starting while it's still a cheap fix, and the games some shops play to fatten the bill. You read it once, and the next time a mechanic hands you a quote, you'll know if he's being straight with you. That alone is worth the price of the book. Right now, it's half off for everyone watching. Code BEI50. First link in the description. Alright, let's talk about Sweden. Every outboard motor you have ever seen shares one piece of DNA. The engine stands upright. A drive shaft runs vertically down the leg, and at the bottom, inside the torpedo of the lower unit, a small set of bevel gears turns the power 90 degrees to spin the propeller. Mercury builds it that way. So do Yamaha, Suzuki, Honda, and Cox with their diesel. That architecture is so universal that nobody thinks of it as a choice anymore. It's simply what an outboard is. It's also a set of compromises that boaters have absorbed for a century without naming them. Those little bevel gears at the bottom live in the hardest neighborhood in boating. Underwater, running hot, taking the full shock every time a driver slams from forward to reverse at the dock. None of it is broken, but all of it is inherited rather than chosen. Oaks Marine, a Swedish company, started from the position that inheritance isn't a reason. Their outboard lays the engine down horizontally, the way it sits in the car it came from. Their chief marketing officer, Pim Pelosi, puts the case plainly. A horizontally mounted engine offers inherently better lubrication and, as a result, a longer operating life. Below that flat engine sits a large gearbox, not down in the water, but directly under the powerhead. And this is where the design gets genuinely strange. In an Oaks, forward and reverse gears are engaged at all times. There's no clunking a dog clutch between gears the way every conventional outboard does. A hydraulic clutch decides which direction the boat goes, and because the gears never disengage and re-engage under load, the quick shifting that chews up conventional lower units simply has nothing to chew. The lower unit itself contains no gears at all. Power travels down to the propeller shaft through a belt, not a rubber band, but a carbon fiber drive belt engineered to carry hundreds of horsepower while isolating the gearbox from shock loads. If that sounds less like an outboard and more like industrial machinery, that's exactly the point. And the choice of powerhead completes the picture. For the flagship Oaks 300, the company didn't design an engine. They went shopping in Munich. The powerhead is BMW's B57, a 3.0-liter twin-turbocharged inline-6 diesel that BMW built for its high-end sedans and SUVs. In the cars, that engine runs with anywhere from 1 to 4 turbochargers. Oaks takes it with 2, marinizes it with closed-loop cooling that keeps corrosive seawater out of the block, and lays it on its side. The smaller Oaks models, 150, 175, and 200 horsepower, use a 2.0-liter 4-cylinder turbo diesel from an automotive line as well. Notice what this company chose, because it's the exact opposite of the bet we covered in our last video. Cox spent a decade and a fortune designing a diesel outboard from a blank sheet, every part purpose-drawn for marine use. Oaks looked at that mountain and walked around it. Take an engine a global carmaker already builds, already stands behind, and already produces at automotive scale, and spend your own engineering budget on the one thing no carmaker will ever build for you: the transmission that gets that power into the water. Two companies, one market, and two completely opposite answers to the same question: purpose-built versus borrowed brilliance. Whether the Swedish answer is the right one comes down to what all that contrarian engineering actually produces. And the first number it produces arrives before the engine has even properly woken up. At 1,000 RPM, an engine speed where a gasoline outboard is barely maintaining its idle, the Oaks 300 is already producing over 500 Newton meters of torque at the crankshaft. That's 367 pound-feet, available essentially the moment the engine turns. Its full 680 Newton meters, 501 pound-feet, arrives at just 1,750 RPM. And by the time that force has multiplied through the gearbox, the company rates torque at the propeller shaft at 945 Newton meters, 697 pound-feet turning the wheel. For scale, Oaks' own marketing likes to point out that this outboard outpulls most pickup trucks. And for once, the marketing line is roughly defensible. Numbers like these, at engine speeds like these, had no precedent in the outboard world. And they're why the engine's specialty is the brutal, unglamorous work: towing, bollard pull, and hard acceleration under heavy load. Then there's the fuel. And here, the honest reporting requires a small detour through Oaks' own paperwork, because the company can't quite agree with itself. Their marketing chief told Boating Magazine the engines burn 40% less fuel than comparable gasoline outboards. The Oaks 300 product page says up to 46% less. A dealer document says up to 42%. Take whichever you like. The spread itself tells you these are company figures, measured under conditions the company chose. And I couldn't find an independent instrumented test that pins the number down the way Boating's certified protocol did for the Cox. What's not in dispute is the direction and the rough size. A large double-digit reduction, which Oaks says extends operational range by 87%. What that means in dollars comes from the customers, and one of them supplied the most arresting number in this entire story. The operator of Voodoo, a commercial power catamaran, runs Oaks diesels and averages about 24 gallons per hour, cruising at 18 to 22 knots. His estimate, published by Oaks, compared to the 425 horsepower gasoline outboards the boat would otherwise run, roughly $150,000 saved per year, around $500,000 over 4 years. Treat that number with the care it deserves. It's one operator's own reckoning on an unusually efficient hull, published by the company that sold him the engines. But even if the math were generous by half, that's still more than $60,000 a year in fuel. And arithmetic like that ends conversations at commercial docks. Another customer reports his engines passing 3,200 operating hours in daily port service, a figure most recreational outboards never see in their lifetimes. One more number deserves its moment because it solves a problem most boaters don't realize they have. The Oaks 300 carries a 180 amp alternator. Yamaha's F300, the gasoline engine it most directly shadows, maxes out at 70. That's not an incremental gap. Modern working boats are floating electrical plants. Sonar arrays, pumps, hydraulics, refrigeration. And Oaks points out their alternator can run hydraulics, pumps, even air conditioning straight off the engine. For a patrol boat idling on station all day with every screen lit, the alternator might genuinely matter more than the torque. And the emissions figures, all from Oaks' own testing, run the same direction. Carbon monoxide down more than 99% against gasoline. Hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxides combined down more than 70. CO2 down 35. And with biofuels, a net reduction the company puts at up to 94%. So the contrarian machine produces numbers as strange as its layout. Around 5,000 of them are out there earning, and 9 of every 10 went to commercial operators. That last statistic isn't a footnote. It's the entire next chapter, because the same machine that saves a charter fleet $500,000 has 3 very specific ways of punishing the wrong buyer. The first way it punishes you is at the scale. A single Oaks 300 weighs 430 kilograms in its lightest configuration, about 948 pounds, and roughly a third more than a comparable gasoline outboard. That's heavier than the Cox, which already carried 200 pounds over its gas rivals. And the Oaks' weight comes with a complication the spec sheet doesn't show. The Australian journalists who tested a twin installation put it without mercy. There is no way of sugarcoating this. The Oaks 300 is huge. They observed that a lot of the mass rides high on the transom. With that big gearbox sitting beneath the flat engine, the weight lives upstairs. And their test boat, carrying close to 900 kilograms of engine, ran a 3.2 meter beam to help counteract what they called the pendulum effect. On a wide commercial hull, manageable. On an ordinary recreational transom, that's not an engine, it's a ballast problem. The second way is the price. And here, the fog itself is information. Try to find what an Oaks 300 costs. The company doesn't publish it. Dealers list it as price on request, which in any industry translates to the same thing. If the number were an advantage, it would be printed in bold. The best available figure comes from commercial boating forums, where operators comparing the Oaks and the Cox put both around $45,000 to $50,000 for the 300 horsepower class, twice the cost of the gasoline engine it replaces, before rigging. And the payback logic is identical to the Cox's, because it has to be. The fuel savings only convert to money through hours, and the boat sales reviewers reached the same verdict this channel keeps reaching. Buying one is a big commitment, justified by the significantly lower fuel bill at the end of each month. A sentence that only describes people whose boats generate a fuel bill worth measuring monthly. The third way is the quietest: support. An outboard with no lower unit gears, a hydraulic clutch, and a carbon fiber belt drive cannot be serviced by muscle memory. Every mechanic in every marina in America has torn down a conventional lower unit. The Oaks' transmission is its own species. On the forums, and the frankest discussions I could find date back a few years, that's exactly where the hesitation lived. Operators intrigued by the engineering but asking who, within towing distance, actually works on one, and naming distributor support as the deciding factor. One prospective buyer emailed distributors with basic questions just to time the response. I found nothing suggesting the service network yet rivals what stands behind a Mercury or a Yamaha. And for a workboat that earns by the day, that question outranks every torque figure in this video. Now, assemble the buyer who survives all 3 filters: a transom and a hull that can carry 1,000 high riding pounds, hours that turn a $25,000 premium into a rounding error against fuel, and an operation located where Oaks support genuinely exists, or with the in-house capability to wrench on an unconventional machine. That describes a harbor pilot service, a commercial fishing operation, or a military fleet with its own workshops. It is, almost point for point, the 9 out of 10 buyers Oaks already sells to. And the company knows it, which is why, as Boating Magazine reported, their focus is commercial fishing, law enforcement, rescue, military, and towing. Sectors that demand durability and are less price sensitive. Which leaves one question standing, and it's the one in the title. If both diesel Challengers, the purpose-built Cox and the borrowed BMW Oaks, end up serving the same tiny professional market, can either of them honestly claim to change boating forever? The answer, strangely, is yes, just not the way the marketing says. Here's how a machine that most boaters will never own changes boating anyway. And the first part of the answer is already history. For 100 years, the outboard was one idea: vertical engine, drive shaft, bevel gears in the water. Refined by everyone and questioned by no one. Oaks built a different idea: put it into production, and sold 5,000 of them into the hardest duty cycles that exist. Daily port operations, patrol work, commercial fishing. Every one of those engines is a running argument that the architecture we all inherited is a choice, not a law. That a belt can replace gears in the water. That a transmission can be built to survive shifting instead of suffering it. And that the serviceable parts can live above the waterline. Whether or not Oaks, the company, thrives, those ideas are now proven in saltwater at commercial scale, and proven ideas migrate. The industry has watched exotic ideas become expected inside a generation. And whether the company thrives is not a throwaway line, because honesty requires this next fact. Oaks Marine is publicly traded in Sweden, and as of this summer, it's a very small company, a few dozen employees, a share price in the pennies, a market value around $20 million. The engineering is proven on the water. The business proving it is fragile. If you're a commercial buyer that goes on the same checklist as the support network, if you're watching the industry, it tells you something sharper. Revolutions in this business are usually funded on thin ice, while the giants wait to see which ideas survive the skaters. The second part of the answer is the precedent of the borrowed engine. Oaks demonstrated that a modern automotive power plant, emissions certified, mass-produced, refined by a car maker's budget, can live horizontally inside an outboard cowling and survive the marine environment behind a closed cooling loop. And these aren't loose adaptations. The small engines come from GM's European diesel line, and the inline-six arrived through a formal supply agreement with BMW itself. Designing a clean sheet marine engine costs what Cox paid, a decade and a fortune. Marinizing what Munich already builds costs a transmission. As emissions rules tighten and the pool of compliant engines narrows, the Oaks path, spend your genius on the drivetrain, borrow the engine, is the cheaper door into the outboard market, and now everyone knows it's unlocked. And the third part is what the professionals are quietly telling you. The working waterfront doesn't buy sentiment. When 9 of 10 engines from a company go to operators who count gallons and hours for a living, and when a charter operator's own reckoning puts his savings in the hundreds of thousands, that's the most honest product review that exists. Purchase orders from people who lose money when they're wrong. Recreational boating has always inherited its future from the commercial side, the way radar, GPS, and diesel inboards all arrived. The professionals adopted this technology first because they feel fuel prices first. Whether the rest of boating follows depends on the same thing it always has: volume bringing the price down, and the support network growing to meet it. So, the verdict, in the same honest shape as the last one. If you run hours for a living on a hull that can carry the weight, the Oaks deserves a place on your short list next to the Cox. Two opposite philosophies, and the choice between them comes down to which trade you'd rather make. Purpose-built design against automotive parts availability. Vertical convention against a transmission built like plant machinery. If you're a recreational boater, this engine isn't asking for your money, and its maker has structured its whole business around not asking. What it offers you instead is a preview, somewhere between the Swedish belt drive, the British clean sheet V8, and a third builder, backed by a British billionaire and arriving in 2026. The outboard on your transom in 15 years is being argued over right now by companies you'd never heard of before these videos. The two bets could not be more opposite, and they end up in the same conclusion. The century-old outboard had far more room for reinvention than anyone believed. The re-evolution didn't come from Mercury or Yamaha. It came from an engineering team in Sweden and a blank sheet in England, and it's running right now on working boats, mostly unnoticed, which is how most revolutions in boating have started.